19th of August, 1839. I wish I could ask how much you remember. I don't know if there will be anything left after I consume this drink. Don't be afraid, Daniel. I can't tell you why, but know this. I choose to forget. Try to find comfort and strength in that fact. There is a purpose. You are my final effort to put things right. God willing, the name Alexander of Brandenburg still invokes bitter anger in you. If not, this will sound horrible. Go to the inner sanctum, find Alexander, and kill him.
Hello and welcome to part 5 in the Harry Mason scale videos. If you've seen the previous videos, then welcome back. If not, that's okay, this one is a standalone video too. The medium of video games is one of the most immersive, but also one of the most complicated ways to tell a story, and there's nothing really like them. A lot goes into them, and not all games tell stories the same way. Unlike the linear progression of a movie or book, a game's interactivity allows so many other ways for the player to discover the plot, meet the characters, and read up on the backstory. And missing any of these can give the impression of skipping a page in a book or phasing out during a movie. There's a lot of ways to tell a story with a game, and conveying it is often difficult.
Speaking of which, you wasted all of that food. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, if it weren't poisoned, then I would have had some.
Pardon?
Normally, I find diary entries to be boring. Long amounts of text just don't get through to me, and the less relevant it is to something I'm interested in, then the less likely it is to stick with me. When I started reading the diary entries in Fatal Frame, I was surprised just how creepy I found them when they were mostly just research clippings on the rituals conducted by the Humero family. While some of them weren't exactly written eloquently and had a lot of flaws, the content of the rituals were often dark and foreboding enough to get me to stop and read each new one to see where they went with it. However, in Outlast, the first couple of diary entries were so vague and uninteresting that I paused the game to read them less and less as the game went on, and only really found one around the middle of the game that piqued my interest when it spoke about Richard Traeger. In Amnesia: The Dark Descent, one of the most helpful things was that the most important diary entries were actually voice acted, and you can feel the emotion in Daniel's voice as he explains the dark mystery surrounding him. It also helped that the game developers marked them in a set of 3, so the player can tell they missed one, and no matter which one you picked up, it would always be in the right order.
And interest. As I write, my thoughts are drawn to my nightmares in which a most disturbing sound calls to me. A sound defying description. A voice from the void. The last few weeks have been awful, with so many sleepless nights dreading a repeat of those horrid dreams.
On top of all this, they ended on cliffhangers, and sometimes Daniel's past was more interesting than what was going on. Little conveniences like this go a long way to getting the backstory across to players without making them feel like the experience is being brought to a halt, even when it is.
Of the village. We must perform the ritual again. The Kosabi alone is not enough. Look, if they are not twins, there is no meaning.
Audio logs are the equivalent to diary entries but have the benefit of voice acting. It's always nicer to put a voice to words and hear how they're feeling. A great example of this is the spirit radio from Fatal Frame 2. You can find crystals throughout the game and then pause it and listen to the thoughts of ghosts you exorcised, and some of it is deeply creepy as the voices are all strained and almost moaning to get through the static. You can hear their thoughts and what they're feeling. It gives an aspect to the enemies that you'd otherwise know nothing about, though they're not always informative. There's a lot of ways to spark intrigue in a player, and this is one of the best examples I can think of. In Soma, you're introduced to the Warden unit by your friend Catherine, who describes it as a station-wide artificial intelligence. The Warden unit takes on the role of antagonist of the game. It never directly communicates with protagonist Simon, and its motives, as explained by Catherine, are that it's now programmed to keep humanity alive at all costs, but it seems to not understand what humanity entails. Once you reach Omicron Station, you find a glass case which seems to hold the reanimated remains of a scientist, Johann Ross, who in a scripted event states to you multiple times to stop the Warden unit. There are multiple bodies laying around the station with exploded heads, and the skill you possess that allows you to hear the last moments of the deceased doesn't work on any of them. You find some diary entries explaining how the Warden unit seems to be more hostile now that Johann Ross has come on board, and some audio logs play back that the Doctor is receiving complaints from people experiencing headaches.
Everything from the sudden signal amplification in black boxes to having a comatose Dr. Ross locked up in the glass jar. We've all been going a bit nuts.
Tell me about it. Feels like my head's about to explode.
In Dispatcher Riley Herber's office, there's a lot of strange drawings, and they seem to imply that she's been in communication with Johann Ross, and she's going to destroy the Warden unit on his instructions. You find her body with her head removed as it was about to get into a suit and leave. Finally, there's an audio log where you hear a member of staff explaining how people are wiping blood from their eyes, and she screams and the sound of her head exploding can be heard before the log ends. The conclusion could be that the Warden unit overloaded their brain implants and killed everyone at Omicron Station to stop Riley Herber from achieving Johann Ross's goal of destroying the Warden unit, and it uses scripted events, conversations, diary entries, audio logs, and environmental storytelling to do all of this. And this is just one part of a 6-hour game with multiple other areas to investigate. When you think about it, it's an insane amount of effort to convey a story, so taking the time to do it is really worth the praise, and it's a story worth telling, because at least to me, it's intriguing. Like the events in Omicron, the backstory is the thing that happened before you arrived, the events before the game. For Alone in the Dark, it's the foreboding history of the Morton family, and it's told through the journals and archives found in the library. It's there to bring the characters to life, and in the case of the Morton family, colour in the faded and long dead characters that you won't get to meet. It gives the game so much more personality to know that the weapons that you find around the house were made by the grandfather of the two Mortons you meet in the game, and when you find his laboratory, he talks about creating them and the hardships he went through to create such advanced weaponry. This not only explains why the guns are here, it covers why they're abnormal, and even how some of them work to add realism to the story. Resident Evil 2 has more diary entries that explain the events that unfolded at the police station when the outbreak occurred, logging each moment as it happened, and this works in tandem with the other diary entries and various dead bodies around the station to explain other changes prior to the outbreak, that almost make it seem like Chief Irons orchestrated the downfall of the police department by changing the locations of weapons and generally making it difficult for officers to defend themselves. Fatal Frame is almost entirely backstory since everyone is dead before you arrive. This allows for some brilliantly creepy cutscenes and diary entries that document a character's arrival at the Humira Mansion all the way to the death at the hands of the ghosts, piece by piece, bit by bit. A fleshed out backstory paints a scene for upcoming events too, and even the extremely basic text box at the beginning of Iron Lung paints such a bleak picture in your mind with a lot of mysteries that you'll never be able to solve, that it'll be working away in the back of your mind for the rest of the game. The same can be said for I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which again paints a horrific future where humanity is reduced to 5 people who are being tortured by a godlike computer who's been playing cruel games with them for over 100 years. It sets a tone and lends a hand to the atmosphere. Horror game characters are a mixed bag. There's one James Sunderland to every 5 Chris Redfields. Based on the context of the game, you can expect different things from different characters. In Murder House, it's unsurprising that a lot of the characters are extremely unlikable and written to be antagonistic, since the game mimes slasher movies of the 80s. Most of them can and will probably die. Even characters that seem to be important to the story can flicker in and out of it in a matter of minutes if it's there to invoke an emotional response, however shallow that may be. However, protagonists are often the weakest element in a horror game. Jill Valentine has no personality in Resident Evil 1 whatsoever, and her voice acting is sort of wooden even in the remaster. From playing the game, we can take away nothing about her besides that she wants to find Wesker and the others, and that's as deep as it goes. While sometimes the character being an empty vessel is done to project yourself into the role of the character you're playing as, sometimes it's just because it wasn't considered something worth doing. Then there's the aforementioned James Sunderland, who arrives in Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his wife who died 3 years ago. His voice is always meek and defeated, and the words he says always imply he's on the verge of giving up. He's embraced the impossible for a chance of seeing his wife again, and comes across as a very sympathetic, but also unreliable and delusional character. He doesn't seem like a bad guy, he just doesn't seem like the hero video games expect. He's an ordinary guy who's been pushed to his limit. This is only who James is at the start of the game, from the brief amounts of dialogue he has until he meets Maria. Even after fighting the first monster, his attitude doesn't change. He stays determined to find his wife, even if he knows he won't. Good character writing enhances a story endlessly. The more you like someone, the more you can relate to them, the more you'll feel a sting of betrayal when they do something horrible or something horrible befalls them. It's difficult to get emotionally invested in Jill Valentine, but it's hard not to at least feel sorry for James Sunderland. Nothing hurts a horror game more than knowing what's going to happen before it does. In the beginning of Man of Medan, there's a giant box named Manchurian Gold that begins leaking some sort of liquid that turns into gas. Soon after, people start seeing strange things and acting weird. It's no leap of the imagination whatsoever to envision that there's some kind of hallucinogenic in the box, and lo and behold, as the teens return to the boat 70 years later, they start seeing things too, and eventually figure out that there's some kind of hallucinogenic substance on the boat. Showing the player the box leaking gives them too much information to sustain a mystery. It's just not a mystery anymore, there's gas coming from the box. This makes a lot of the game painful when you know far more than the characters do and have to wait for them to figure it out. On the other hand, there's Paratopic, where it feels like everyone knows more about what's going on than you. The jump cuts in the story make you question everything from who you are to what's going on. You seem to change who you're playing as from moment to moment, and be it what you're doing, where you're going, or what's happening around you, it's difficult to tell what happened at all. You were part of something big, you saw things, but all you're left with is theories as to what it was. The best stories keep the player guessing until the end. In Alice Madness Returns, it seems like everyone is the villain, with each new character taking advantage of her in appalling ways, but none of the blatantly self-centered, greedy, or evil people is the one to blame for the trauma Alice is feeling. There's more symbolism and cryptic clues as the game goes on, with so many things alluding to someone you're waiting to see, some big bad to materialize and explain it was them all along, until you realize the same time she does that the one who's supposed to help her is the one who hurt her. For all the interesting stories you encounter, there are tons of boring and unimaginative stuff that draw their inspiration from the same stale pool of horror tropes. When I write the reviews, I find the story is the most subjective category, with usually the most arguments over it. Everyone has favourite subgenres. Some like stories of blood and gore, some like gothic horror or sci-fi survival stories. No one theme is better than the other, but what we can all agree on is that originality is always cherished the most. Horror games are often victim to imitation, seeing another game or movie's success and making it your own. For the amount of freedom that story writing in horror games allows, the diversity is often disappointing. Horror trappings are hard to escape from, but it can be done. Games like Devotion, Detention, Iron Lung, Alice Madness Returns, Mundawn, Echo Night Beyond, Soma, Sanitarium, Sagebrush. There's so much potential for brilliant and unique games in the future. Thank you for watching today's video. Next time I'll have the final part of the Harry Mason scale videos with gameplay and replayability. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to support the channel on Patreon and get early access to stuff I'm making for Halloween, Until Dawn is finished and up on there to see with Afraid of Monsters, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and Unforgiving a Northern Hymn. coming in the next few weeks, as well as some other random stuff like a mod for Doom called Unloved. There's also weekly updates and stuff which are for free. You don't have to be a supporter to see them if you just want to see what I'm working on. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I also felt sorry for James Sunderland, I did not scream like a banshee or run away with the computer, and I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. You can always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.